To understand Revelation, we need to know who wrote it and where. Approximately 60 years after the death of Jesus, a collection of scrolls was delivered to the small Christian community in Ephesus in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. The scrolls contained what is now known as the Book of Revelation. The author's name was in the book, John. Tradition says that this is the disciple John, the fisherman's son of Zebedee, the writer of John's Gospel, who looked after Mary, Jesus' mother, after her son's crucifixion. Yet in Revelation, John never describes himself as a disciple of Jesus, nor writes as if he ever knew him. Now, new scientific methods can help resolve the question of who the author really was. Sir Anthony Kenny is a leading expert in stylometry, which analyzes writing technique.
The things that are most characteristic of authors are not special words that are their favorites, but the frequency with which they use very common words.
Two of these common words examined by Sir Anthony were de, a word similar to but, and kai, meaning and.
The word and is twice as frequent in the book of Revelation as it is in any other book of the New Testament, whereas the Gospel of John is not particularly fond of and, its use is less than average. On the other hand, the Greek word de, which is very frequent in any other Greek text I've ever met, occurs only 7 times in the whole of the book of Revelation.
Sir Anthony carried out 99 similar tests on Revelation and John's Gospel. His results were conclusive.
I could, by using a simple statistical technique, put together these 99 tests into a particular way of discriminating between texts, and it was at the outcome of that that I saw that the fourth Gospel and the book of Revelation were right apart. I think that it's extremely unlikely that the two books were written by the same author.
So the case for John the disciple writing the book of Revelation doesn't seem a strong one. Greg Carey, an expert in the meaning of Revelation, believes there are further clues in the book that can point us to the author.
John addresses his audience in such a direct way. He says, "I, John, your brother," as if he's someone who knows them and whom they will recognize. The book of Revelation begins with a series of 7 letters to churches that are located in what we call Asia Minor, or southwestern Turkey. Each letter addresses a single church, congratulates it for its virtues, or admonishes it for its faults, so that one assumes that John knew these churches and had been present among them.
And there's a further indication that John was writing to a congregation. John's Apocalypse, which means Revelation, describes colorful visions of angels and monsters. The letter, likely to have been dictated to a scribe, is clearly no routine correspondence to a Christian church. John has something important to say, and he uses his audience's imagination to help get his point across.
It's important to remember that the book of Revelation was written to be heard. John blesses those who hear the words of the prophecy, as well as the one who reads it, presumably aloud to an audience. In other words, the book was written to have an effect upon people who weren't studying it like we read books today, but were experiencing it through their imaginations, much as modern audiences listen to radio programs.
and there was a clear need for revelation to be written for the ear and not the eye.
Most early Christian communities would have had a few people who were literate, and they would most likely be the leaders of that particular community. But the majority would be illiterate, and this was a reflection of society generally.
So John was almost certainly a man of authority in the church, writing to his flocks in Asia Minor. Yet that raises a fundamental question. 7-headed demons, 4 terrifying horsemen are unusual images even by first-century standards. What made John draw on such fearsome images to convey his message? To understand the true meaning of the book, we need to go back to its roots. According to the Bible, John wrote Revelation on the island of Patmos off the Turkish coast, at that time under the control of the Roman Empire.
John tells his audience that he's on the island because of the Word of God and the testimony of Jesus. Whenever the book of Revelation mentions the testimony of Jesus, it connects it to suffering. In fact, the Greek word martus for witness has become our word martyr, and it takes that usage first in the book of Revelation.
If John was suffering on Patmos, then was he a prisoner of the Romans? Ian Boxall is an expert on the author of Revelation.
This is the cave where, according to tradition, John has his visions. You can see the place over there where traditionally he laid his head, and then, not being quite so agile, there's a grip for him to lever himself up. John, according to all the traditions, is here as an exile. They differ precisely as to why he was here, who exiled him, but they all agree that he was here as a result of his Christian belief.
Although there is no archaeological evidence of a Roman prison, the location of the island suggests it served a military purpose. Patmos may have been one of a number of fortress islands defending the important Roman seaport of Miletus, about 40 miles away on the mainland. It was an ideal place to detain exiles. But if John was in exile, it seems strange that he had the freedom to find a cave, see visions, write them down, and then to send the documents to his churches back on the mainland. This may well be due to the way Rome exiled troublemakers.
When Roman authorities would place someone in exile, he would have had quite a bit of freedom. He wouldn't have been imprisoned. He would have only been excluded from appearing in certain regions, or he would have been told that he had to restrict his movements to just this one island. But he may have been able to carry on a correspondence through intermediaries who would sail from the island back to the mainland and return, so that he may have been able to keep in touch with the churches he was addressing.
Despite this freedom to communicate, John was still trapped on Patmos, separated from the Christian churches in Asia Minor. This sense of frustration may have led John to write Revelation with its violent images of worldwide catastrophe. The theory is that John was furious with the Romans for persecuting him and his fellow Christians.
There's a lot of anger in Revelation and a yearning for justice to be done. And that's often been seen as a direct result of Roman persecution of Christians.
On the face of it, John had every reason to be angry. The established view is that in the 1st century, the Roman authorities systematically persecuted Christians across the empire. It was believed that the violence started about 20 years before Revelation was written, under the reign of the Emperor Nero in AD 64.
Tradition has it that Nero blamed the Christians for the tragic and catastrophic fire that devastated the city in that year. Some Christians were crucified and used their bodies as torches to light the pathways into the city. It was such a devastating experience that the memories of Nero stayed within early Christian communities.
Most academics agree that Nero did persecute Christians, but Revelation probably wasn't written under Nero. It's been dated to around AD 90, in the reign of the Emperor Domitian. And evidence in Revelation itself seems to show that Domitian was far less brutal than Nero. If Revelation had been motivated by the persecution of John's community, then you might expect him to list a host of martyrs by name. In fact, Revelation mentions only one.
The book is obsessed with those who have died on account of their testimony to Jesus, numbers them in the thousands. But he only names one, a believer named Antipas who has died on account of his testimony.
Although John does mention the death of the martyr Antipas, there's now evidence that the Emperor Domitian may not have the blood of many Christians on his hands after all.
Recent historians have begun to question whether Domitian actually did persecute Christians, and indeed whether he was quite the tyrant that he was made out to be by later historians. There's not a great deal of evidence for that when one begins to scratch the surface.
So if Christians were not being systematically persecuted, it's hard to imagine how Revelation could have had any impact on its audience. John must have had another target. These 2nd century ruins hold a vital clue as to what drove John to write Revelation and whether the book really does have the key to the end of the world. The ancient city of Pergamum lies 200 miles north of Ephesus in modern-day Turkey, and it was a major political and religious center in the Roman province of Asia Minor. It was also home to one of the fledgling Christian communities who first received the Book of Revelation. But Dan Showalter, an expert in biblical archaeology, believes that Pergamum's pagan